tarda.
Bona tarda.
Hola, bona tarda a tothom. És un goig tenir la sala plena per rebre Joe Sacco. Per Biblioteques de Barcelona és un plaer tenir una de les referències internacionals en periodisme gràfic, un autor amb obres tan destacades com Palestina, El Mediador, Coraze, Notas al pie de Gaza, La guerra de Gaza, Un tributo a la tierra, reportajes, i que avui tenim perquè parlarà del disturbio eterno, una obra que se centra en els conflictes ètnics a l'Índia actual. Com sempre, la conversa durarà 50 minuts, 55. Tindreu la possibilitat de fer preguntes a l'autor i després hi haurà espai per la signatura, una estona per la signatura. Sí que us demanem, sisplau, com que sou molta gent, que sigui un llibre per persona. Només caldrà que feu cua aquí, a la dreta de l'escenari. I si encara no teniu cap obra seva, han vingut a la llibreria Zavara per vendre llibres. Avui conversarà amb Joe Sacco, Ivan Pintor, especialista en còmic, cinema i cultura audiovisual, i una figura de referència també per la casa per Biblioteques de Barcelona. Gràcies.
Bé, moltíssimes gràcies. Gràcies per estar aquí. Gràcies a Biblioteques de Barcelona, a tots vosaltres i molt especialment al Joe per acceptar fer aquesta sessió que ens fa moltíssima il·lusió. Jo he de dir que estic molt emocionat, que de cop i volta per mi tenir l'ocasió de dialogar amb Joe Sacco és com un regal extraordinari. No requereix de molta més presentació que la que el César molt generosament ens ha fet. Jo crec que és la figura central d'allò que podem dir periodisme gràfic, còmic periodístic, és igual la denominació, però aquesta trobada del còmic, de la seqüencialitat amb la realitat. I crec que ningú fa aquesta feina com la fa el Joe Sacco, que ha esdevingut un mestre. Ara estàvem parlant, abans d'entrar, del seu darrer llibre i fins i tot de com fer aquest diàleg, si començar a fer un recorregut des dels seus inicis, però em semblava que una bona manera era començar aquí, en aquesta obra mestra, ho he de dir ara mateix. Em sembla un còmic absolutament extraordinari i només no vull enrotllar-me molt, vull donar la paraula al Joe, però sí que vull dir dues coses. La primera és que en aquest temps en què parlar de periodisme sovint és parlar d'intel·ligència artificial, fact-checking, de xarxes socials, veure un periodisme fet des de l'apropament als rostres, a les persones, a la indagació real, que busca saber quina és la veritat, és realment impressionant. Per mi aquí està el veritable periodisme d'avui en dia. I sense més, i agraint-li al Joe, sí que li vull fer una primera pregunta per començar a entrar en el llibre, i és quan va començar, perquè hi ha diversos territoris que ha estudiat molt bé el Joe Sacco, Palestina, com sabem, els Balcans, la Índia. Com va començar l'apropament, en concret, a aquesta zona d'Uttar Pradesh i aquesta situació, aquests esdeveniments que se'ns expliquen en aquest llibre?
Okay. Buona tarda. Lovely to see you here. I had done another story that took place in India, and my colleague there wrote to me and told me if you want, because he knew I was interested in going back to India at some point, and he mentioned this riot, or these series of riots that took place in Muzaffarnagar in Uttar Pradesh. And I thought about it, and I realized the riots had already taken place. So what could I do about this situation that would be interesting? And it occurred to me that what I could focus on was what narratives people tell themselves about what they did in a time of violence. What stories do they construct? And then to get those stories and then try to find out what actually happened, to put those things side by side, because I think that's a lot of what we do. A lot of events now are based on the narratives we told ourselves before. So that was the initial impetus, just to go and see if I could find out those stories.
A mi m'agradaria preguntar-te una cosa, no? Fins i tot abans d'entrar en la matèria del que aquí expliques, que és impressionant, no? Vull dir que des d'aquesta contenció total que sempre té el Joe Sacco, no? De no abusar d'elements melodramàtics, no, centrar-se realment en explicar els fets, resulta increïblement emocionant i alhora aporta moltíssima informació sobre una situació sobre la qual, no sé, segurament a molts dels que estan aquí els hi passa com a mi. Jo no sabia res de la zona d'Uttar Pradesh, de les ètnies en conflicte, i aquesta capacitat que sempre tens, no?, de veure com els diferents elements en un conflicte s'autoexpliquen efectivament les seves narratives. Jo et volia preguntar si creus que el còmic, en particular, té unes eines que no tenen altres mitjans. Vull dir, quan llegim un còmic podem fer una cosa que no podem fer en cap altre mitjà, podem fer-ho en la literatura, en el periodisme escrit, que és tornar enrere, però aquí de manera visual, veure els rostres, no? Veure les persones, com dèiem ara fa una estona. És a dir, sempre tenim la reversibilitat del temps per tirar enrere, per anar endavant i enrere, i sempre tenim la panopsi, no?, de la pàgina, és a dir, aquesta capacitat de veure al mateix temps moltes coses. Segurament, doncs això, en el cinema no tenim. Creus que el còmic permet vehicular aquesta informació complexa i narratives complexes que les diferents persones que intervenen en un conflicte s'expliquen a elles mateixes, que permet com una distància, no?, un detachment més gran respecte als esdeveniments que altres mitjans?
Further detachment, that's interesting. My goal with the comic is to drop the reader into a place, a time and a place, and to make the reader feel the place and to sort of have the taste of the place in their mouth and see the dust on their shoes. I mean, that's ultimately, I'm trying to, as much as I can, have the reader feel some of the same things I did and get to know some of the same people I got to know. And I think comics have a special way of doing that because you just open the page and you're there. It's immediate. You can be lost in that world. And of course that takes work. It means you have to draw what people are wearing, the kind of cars they're driving, what the vegetation looks like. There's a lot that goes into it. And for example, it's easy to write the word crowd, but when you're drawing, I think you can really make someone sense what a crowd is like. The word crowd is so abstract. But if you take the time as a cartoonist to draw individual faces, to show the individuals within the crowd, but then to show the great mass of people, I think the reader can feel the crowd and feel why there was an energy in the crowd. So, it's hard for me to explain why these things work because so much of it is instinctual, and I do things sort of by feel, to be honest. I don't think, this is what I have to do to get this across. I just go at it, and I have just very normal sensibilities, so I feel like if I've impressed myself with the size of the crowd in the drawing, I'll say, well, an average reader is going to be impressed by this. You mentioned melodrama before. It's the same sort of thing. I mean, a lot of my books deal with violence, unfortunately, but I try not to make violent episodes melodramatic, but partly because I have a relatively normal sensibility. There's only so much I want to see. So I judge, what's that famous line by one of the pre-Socratic philosophers that man is the measure of all things? And I think of myself in that way, relatively normal person. What can I absorb, and what will be too much for me?
En aquest sentit, per exemple, de les dues qüestions que has plantejat ara, no? Una, per exemple, aquesta idea d'estar in situ, jo crec que tots els que hem llegit còmics del Joe Sacco podem recordar com a Gorazde feia fred, hi havia neu, no? O com la sensació de por en certs llocs de Palestina, no? El control, sobretot, no? És una mena d'impressió que tens gairebé sobre la pell i això és realment molt fort. pensava en aquest llibre, que segurament, com que acaba d'aparèixer, molta gent no ha llegit i ja des d'aquest moment recomano que es llegeixi perquè és increïble. Hi ha un moment que jo et comentava fa una estona que a mi em va impressionar molt, perquè efectivament és aquest salt entre l'individu i la massa, el moviment que les narratives, que l'estar en un col·lectiu genera i la por que fa això, perquè realment un ho està llegint i és un moment en què tu com a narrador t'adreces al lector directament, és el primer moment en què t'adreces directament i sents por, i sents por i tens la sensació que és la por que tu has sentit una mica, estant en aquell lloc o reconstruint. I aquí és on ve una qüestió que em sembla important respecte a això i la violència que esmentaves, el valor de la reconstrucció. Sovint, jo crec que al llarg del segle XX s'ha parlat molt, a partir, evidentment, de la Segona Guerra Mundial, molt en particular, a partir de la Shoah, de si és possible o no reconstruir esdeveniments que han estat tràgics, horrorosos, genocidis, assassinats, els camps de concentració, etc. I jo crec que tu, des del còmic, has construït una manera de saber reconstruir aquesta violència sense, deixa'm dir-ho així, o sigui, a través del dibuix potser, que és una cosa que des del cinema segurament és infinitament més difícil de fer, no tornar a ferir a les víctimes. Aquesta és una cura que tu sempre prens, no tornar a ferir a les víctimes, o sigui, construir una mena d'espai de respecte. I jo crec que aquí, en aquest llibre, molt en particular, perquè ets capaç de posar-te en totes al mateix temps, en totes les mirades que convergeixen en aquesta situació, en la qual hi ha, entre d'altres, un crim inicial, que funciona gairebé com un element narratiu de novel·la negra.
I'm not sure if I understand if there's a question.
No, en realitat
I appreciate what you said, though.
Estava explicant la meva meravella llegint-ho, però sí que et faré una pregunta en aquest sentit.
Okay, but the thing is, when I'm there, I'm behaving as a journalist, and I'm just trying to collect information. It's almost like you're collecting pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and you're not doing things consecutively. Sometimes, if I'm there, if I find, oh, this is the end of the story, but the person's here now, let me find out. You're learning things at a different time than the way that they will be assembled later. And it's only later, when I'm sitting at the drawing table, when I'm writing a script, that I begin to assemble the things. So when you say I'm addressing the reader, for example, those thoughts, a lot of the thoughts are not coming to me at the time. At the time, I'm, let's say, removing the stories from people as a surgeon is removing the stories, and I'm putting them in a bag. It's only later that I'm sort of looking at them all and thinking some of those things through. Some of this is happening while I'm there. Elements are beginning to come together. But even, let's say, the philosophical questions where I'm asking the reader, because I don't have answers to some of these questions, I'm just posing them. What is democracy? What is a crowd? Do we, as people who believe in democracy, we appreciate the right to assemble, where people can voice what they want, voice their demands. But when does this become something dangerous? It's not that I know the answers to these. I'm posing them as a fellow citizen in, let's say, the Western world, because I think this book doesn't just apply to India. I meant it as I was doing it, not while I was there, but as I was writing and drawing it, it occurred to me that this isn't just about India. There's a wider scope to this book. And that's why I drop things philosophically. And in a way that you can ask this question whether you live in India or the United States or Spain or anywhere in the West.
Sí, jo crec que aquesta dimensió universal és essencial per entendre una mica com ens entenem a nosaltres. Crec que en aquest sentit, per exemple, aquí hi ha una feina analítica, podem parlar ara després del teu mètode de treball, de com recol·lectes les notes, ben diferent, per exemple, el llibre que va ser publicat aquí anteriorment, que és La guerra de Gaza, que és un llibre urgent, és un llibre mogut per una mena de necessitat de manifestar-te i necessitat d'explicar una cosa de manera molt urgent. Són dos tipus de feina diferents en aquest cas.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this is a work of journalism, and mostly that's what I've done, is works of journalism, reporting. I've almost stopped using the word journalism, and now I start thinking reporting, going and finding out what's going on. Of course, with what's been happening in Gaza, Western journalists aren't allowed in, or any foreign journalist isn't allowed in unless you're going under the auspices of the Israeli army, which I doubt they'd let me go with them at this point. So, but the thing is, I have a real personal relationship with Gaza. I've spent a lot of time there. When I did the book Footnotes in Gaza, I spent 2 months in Rafah. So I know those streets, I know people there, and I knew I had to respond in some way, but if you're cut off from doing reporting, which I think is what I would prefer to do, I would prefer to go and just let people tell me their stories or see for myself and describe it. I had to respond in some way, and I knew I would, but one of my friends there in a town called Han Yunis, after about 6 weeks of the bombing, he wrote and he said, "Please raise up your voice." And to me, that was like, okay, stop thinking about how you're going to do, just start. So I literally looked at a piece of paper and just started writing. And I don't know who said it, maybe it was Susan Sontag. It's like writing is thinking. And it's true, even drawing is thinking. Because once I start, my thoughts begin to come. If you don't start, they're not going to come. So you just sort of jump into the water. And I began to find a voice that I could be comfortable with that wasn't reporting. And ultimately what I fell back on was satire, because when I started doing comics, they were all satirical comics, and also dark humor. I was going to use dark humor, and I realized that's okay. I felt comfortable using dark humor because everywhere I've gone, in Bosnia with the Palestinians, under very bad circumstances, they were often would tell these jokes about what's going on with each other, what's going on with themselves. So I felt like dark humor is a way of reflecting what I knew of their personalities too. But you're right, it was, I wrote that book out of sheer anger and desperation. And I decided it's a book about what Israel's doing, but really it's a book about, more so, it's a book about the United States and the West and our failures.
Fa uns anys, el 2012, vas publicar un llibre amb Chris Hedges que es diu Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, també sobre els Estats Units. No? Com creus que seria ara, en aquest moment, no? Que crec que han canviat moltes coses i realment la situació geopolítica i sobretot una qüestió molt vinculada al que ara deies del sentit de l'humor, no? És a dir, la màquina de produir imatges polítiques als Estats Units ja és una paròdia en si mateixa, no? O sigui, com seria desplaçar plenament el mecanisme, no tant del llibre anterior, de la guerra de Gaza, sinó aquest mecanisme de recerca als Estats Units, no? Perquè aquí hi ha un discurs que podem aplicar als Estats Units, no? Però com veus tu ara mateix, com a autor, la situació i com es pot rebre, per exemple, aquest llibre de manera diferent aquí en Espanya, o en França, o en Malta, i als Estats Units?
Which book? This one here?
Yeah, this one.
Well, I think this isn't what I was thinking I would discover when I was there, but I began to see the relationship that can develop between electoral politics and violence, unfortunately. As I think we've lost, if we ever had it, to be honest, the idea of the democratic spirit, thinking about what democracy means, that it does mean including a lot of voices and encouraging that. That's my idea of the democratic spirit, but that doesn't really exist. I mean, the way it works for us is we're generally not so involved in politics. We've farmed all that out to what the people we call representatives. And for them to stay in power, often, in this particular case, they need to divide people, because I think it's a lot harder to climb by telling people, these are our common problems, how can we collectively come to solutions? Those are sometimes abstract notions. There's a lot of work that has to go into that, and you have to convince a lot of people of this. Or you can say, the reason you feel bad is because they're immigrants. And what's going to go to the lizard brain? We talk a lot about how we're rational beings. We can be rational, but the truth is, I think we respond to very primal motivations. And fear, it's just easy to get people motivated by fear and security. So you see that in the States. You see it in the West in general. And I think in India, politicians have risen on violence between communities. I mean, Prime Minister Modi, maybe 20 years ago, he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, one of the states in India, and there was violence between Muslims and Hindus. There was a Hindu pilgrims who died in a train fire, and it was blamed on Muslims. It's not clear exactly what happened, but then there was an enormous amount of violence against Muslims. And Modi, the chief minister there, instead of sending in the police to stop it, basically the violence seemed to go on for about 5 days. And he later said, he said, well, if something happens, sometimes there are reactions. In other words, not condemning the violence or trying to calm people down, but sort of explaining it away. Now, he was exonerated by a court, whatever you think of the exoneration, for his whatever he did or didn't do. But it's clear that a lot of Muslims died, and after that, he became the star of Hindu nationalism. And it's on that he built. That was one of the building blocks for his rise to power. And it's the same true with Muzaffarnagar. After that, the BJP, the Hindu Nationalist Party, exploited what happened there. He was able to win the election. It's one of the factors, but it was part of his being able to win the election the next year. And I think a lot of we have to start really paying attention to violence and how politicians are using it in the West. If you look at what's going on in the United States now, you've all heard of ICE, this paramilitary organization. It's being funded very heavily. There are advertisements you see in the United States where someone will get a $50,000 bonus for joining ICE. And what they do is they seize people, illegal, not illegal, whoever they want. They can do anything they want. They're masked. They've been told that they can do anything they want. And you have to realize they're not hiding the violence. The violence is the theater. They want you to see the violence. They want you to be intimidated. And that's dangerous. We don't think of, in the West, we think we're above all this, and we're simply not, unfortunately. Anyway, at the very least, that's why I'm asking these questions, we have to be very aware. And we have to really think about what democracy means. And do we want a democracy or not?
Això que dius és central, no? O sigui, que la política avui sigui una prolongació de la violència o una forma organitzada de perpetuar la idea de guerra i utilitzi aquestes eines, i que això hagi d'alguna manera retornat a Occident, no? Des d'un dispositiu colonial, com sempre ho hem vist, és una cosa insòlita. En els anys que portes tu treballant aquesta modalitat de còmic, has advertit una evolució, un canvi en l'escenari mundial que t'hagi obligat a adoptar certes tècniques? És a dir, des que vas començar en Palestina, inicialment per fantagràfics, no? Fins ara, creus que hi ha un canvi en l'escenari geopolític global que et porti a treballar d'una altra manera? O el mode de treball segueix sent el mateix per denunciar justament aquestes erosions de la democràcia?
I mean, I suppose my work has changed in the sense that over time, when I studied journalism, and I think of events, okay, this has happened to the Palestinians in 1948, and then this happened in 67, and there were the refugees, and then there was the Suez War. You tend to think in terms of historical events and what they mean, and all that is really important. But I think over time, it's not so much the geopolitics. It still interests me, and I still think it's very important. It's human nature that I've begun to examine. And this book, I think, is perhaps the first one where I'm directly addressing some of the more philosophical points. And you can find those philosophical points in all my books, but this is a bit more direct, I think. And I would like to go on. Even this comic I did, The War on Gaza, it's more philosophical. And at first I was uncomfortable, as I mentioned, doing it, because it wasn't reporting. But then I sort of developed a taste for that sort of way of writing, sort of more like an essay and contemplating things. But in some ways, it's good that I studied journalism, but I wish I'd studied psychology or even just human behavior, evolutionary biology. All those things have begun to interest me over time because I really begin to wonder about us as people. I don't think you can really set up any political system that can't eventually devolve. There's no, we say, well, we're a nation of laws, for example. We live by the rule of law. In the end, the rule of law doesn't matter if the people or the people instituting the law are corrupt. And so it's also made me think of ethics. And even religion. I'm not a religious person, but I keep thinking, what can keep people together from doing some of these really evil things to each other? I don't think law can stop people. It's got to be something else, and we better find it.
Amb això ens deixes en un llindar difícil de seguir, no? És a dir, quan les lleis, que és el que passa ara, no serveixen, quan la legalitat internacional i dins de cada territori és feble, no? I efectivament, com tu dius, s'ha de buscar una altra cosa, s'ha de buscar una altra manera de protegir l'individu. Jo crec que hi ha una cosa de la que m'agradaria parlar, no? Efectivament, en aquest llibre parles de què és la massa, què és el tumulto, no? Què és realment trobar-te amb la por, com ens autoconvencem de les nostres narratives i utilitzes, això sí, una tècnica que sempre has utilitzat, que et singularitza moltíssim, que és la teva pròpia autoincorporació, no? Que és un dispositiu que tu has trobat, no? El de ser un personatge més. I jo crec que una de les singularitats, i diria que en aquest llibre això passa encara més, és encara més fort, és que apareixes tu, aquest alter ego que et crees, aquest personatge, com encara més sorprès, amb més estupor, sense respostes, no? Contemplant la impossibilitat de trobar una veritat única, naturalment, i la impossibilitat de tenir respostes. Per tu, com funciona per tu aquesta idea d'autoincorporar-te? Quins elements jugues? Com va creixent en cada història?
In this particular story or over time?
En general, al llarg de la història, però aquí jo crec que hi ha un petit canvi, no? Hi ha un canvi en què apareixes com encara més sorprès, no? Més davant d'alguna cosa inaprensible, molt difícil d'explicar.
I mean, we're being lied to all the time, but in this book, I was sitting with people that had probably been involved in murderous events, and they're lying to you, and you know they're lying to you. It's, you sense it by what they're saying, or how what they're saying is implausible. For example, there was a village, it was a mixed village where there were Hindu landowners, Jat Hindu landowners, and Muslim labor, and a number of Muslim laborers, well, they all fled, but a number were killed, or let's say were missing, and I'm talking to the people who are sort of explaining, well, what happened to the Muslims who were here? And they were telling me, well, nothing happened here because they all escaped. They found out there was going to be violence, so they left before the violence. And I said, well, how did you not notice? And I said, didn't you see them leaving over? They said over 3 days. Didn't you see them leaving and wonder what was going on? And they said, or one guy said, well, no, they left at night. And these are the people that are working their fields. This is their labor. How do you not notice that the people working your fields are leaving? So immediately you just say, it's bullshit. It seems like bullshit. Now I have to, but it's not enough to say it's bullshit. You have to try to find some semblance of the truth. So the astonishment is that people are lying to your face in a way that it's not a good lie. It's not a believable lie. In Muslim villages, they were telling me that convoys of Hindus that were going through, where the Hindus were attacked and some were killed by stones and bricks, the Muslims village chief was telling me, well, that was little children that were throwing the stones. I mean, you have to think, oh, really, little children are lining the streets, throwing the stones at grown men in pickup trucks, and 3 people died, and that's how this happened. So that's the astonishment, in a way. Yeah, I mean, and over time, I can still be astonished. I think earlier on in my career, I was more unsure of myself, more scared, let's say. And over time, for some reason, I'm just a little more, I'm calmer in what I'm doing. I think you can see that over the course of the books. I'm just a bit more calm about what's going on.
Hi ha una fotògrafa, una fotoreportera molt famosa, que és Susan Meiselas, no? Que va estar a Nicaragua als anys 70, al 79, i va copsar les imatges d'aquell moment històric. No? Anys després, ja als anys 90, ella deia, molt bé, jo vaig fer les grans fotografies, no? del moment, el gran imaginari periodístic del que passava al 79 a Nicaragua, però no vaig entendre res, no? O sigui, no vaig entendre res. I torna i fa una pel·lícula que es diu Pictures from a Revolution, en la qual torna a buscar els personatges que havien aparegut en les seves fotografies, a buscar una mica què passa en el fora de camp de les imatges. No? Sempre m'ha semblat un exercici molt interessant en aquest cas. Clar, tu, d'alguna manera, incorpores a través del periodisme gràfic aquest gest ja dintre de la teva obra, aquest gest de reflexió, és a dir, estàs necessitant crear una mena de mapa mental del que està passant. No? Per mi, per exemple, una de les teves obres on aquesta idea del mapa mental emergeix d'una manera més poderosa és The Fixer, el mediador, no? On fas un retrat molt interessant del que estava passant als Balcans durant la guerra. Llavors, jo el que et volia preguntar és justament tirant enrere per entendre justament el valor d'aquest llibre i l'evolució i aquesta dimensió més filosòfica que hi ha aquí, com allà et vas composar aquell mapa? Va ser només a través de la teva recerca de camp, no? Vas haver de llegir bastants llibres d'història. Com és el teu mètode de treball des del punt de vista de la recreació d'aquest present que tu analitzes?
I mean, before I go to a place, I try to read something about it. Before I went to Bosnia, for example, I read whatever was being written. And since the war was going on, there was little to read. It's only when you get there that you really begin to understand the complexities of what's going on. And I'm often, people would be talking and I'd say, oh, what's this organization? What's this paramilitary group? Who are these, what's this Croat group that they're talking about? I mean, you have to become a pretty quick study. But I mean, one of the old, I think, journalistic ideas is that you should be able to quickly, that's what I like about journalism. Are you able to quickly find your feet and learn? And this really takes not just your own efforts, it usually takes people, local people, who are going to help you out. In the book, The Fixer, it's all about someone who is a fixer, who is there to help journalists get the story. But through this one character, his name is Nevin, I was able to tell the story of what happened at the beginning of the war, which I didn't know much about, but he could explain it. Later on, I had to do separate research to fill in some of the gaps, but he was in a basically a criminal gang at the beginning of the war. There was no one to defend Sarajevo. There was no army. So basically what the government did is, if there was a criminal gang, one day it's the criminal gang, the next day it's the 10th Mountain Brigade. You know, they just made them into an army unit. So that caused all kinds of problems. They were the only people who knew how to use guns, basically. So through him, I realized I can tell a bigger picture. Through him, I realized I could tell his own individual story. And through him, I could tell the relationship of a journalist to someone like that, to a fixer. Because a fixer can also manipulate a story. A fixer can have their own agenda. They're not just translating for you or being a guide, a neutral guide. You're saying, I want to speak to this person. Sometimes they'll steer you in a way that suits their own agenda. And that was also going on. And it's a financial transaction, so the longer he can keep himself valuable to you, the better it is for him. So there are many different ways, if that's what you mean by mapping. But those all occur to you sometimes while you're there, and often when you're writing, when you're going over your notes. I go very thoroughly over my notes when I get back. I have interviews that I transcribe my own recordings. It takes weeks sometimes. And I have journal entries. I index everything. It sounds really, it sounds maybe weird, but I spend sometimes weeks indexing my interviews and my journal entries. So if someone says something in journal number 2 and they also send something in interview number 3, then I know it's all together. I have a synopsis. It's a lot of work, but it saves a lot of time later, and it helps me go deeper into the story and understand it more by going over those things myself. Because sometimes I'll do 5 or 6 interviews in a day, and when I'm transcribing, I don't even remember. I don't remember this, because your head is just full and full and full, and you have to push it. You have to push one story aside so you can let the next one in. So I do that, then I write an entire script, and then that can take weeks or months. I never really know with writing. And then I start drawing. And so I edit as I go along. I don't storyboard. I just go straight to paper.
Treballes realment com un muntador cinematogràfic al mateix temps que vas fent el guió, no? És a dir, vas fent tota aquesta feina d'ordenació, de muntatge, i jo crec que aconsegueixes amb això un efecte temporal molt poderós, no? D'immersió temporal, aquí dels dies, no? D'acompanyar els dies de l'esdeveniment mentre es van reconstruint les narratives d'una manera, insisteixo, molt intensa. Aquí és veritablement molt intens. I has jugat amb el temps de vegades. O sigui, penso, per exemple, en una obra com La Gran Guerra, no? Que és deliberadament un treball, no? Sobre aquesta idea de la seqüencialitat, de la panopsi en una jornada. Dins d'aquesta condició de testimoni que tenen tots els àlbums, quin joc juga el temps?
Well, I mean, you have to go back into time to explain events. Nothing comes out of the blue. What happened in the past builds what happens today. The events of the past will create the anger that festers and then explodes later on. So you have to put things in their context. In this book, you have to go back at the least to the partition, when Pakistan and India were created and millions of people were expelled or fled from one place to the other, and they estimate about 1 million people died. And though India developed their constitution it's very strong. And they really tried to establish a democratic constitution. But if you want to explain how that's slowly eroded, how India went from being a very self-consciously secular state because it had different religious groups, so they wanted to keep it secular and allow different religions to prosper, to a state where when the famous Babri Masjid mosque in Ayodhya was destroyed, a very famous old mosque was destroyed because there was a claim that Ram had, if I remember right, born there. So now there's a huge temple that was built there under the auspices of the Hindu Nationalist Party, and Prime Minister Modi basically was the master of ceremonies, almost doing priestly duties there. So in other words, here's the prime minister of what was once a secular state doing sort of Hindu priestly rites. It's a real change. But you have to show how, to show that moment, you have to show what has changed. And to show what has changed, you have to show how it was. The same is true in the book I did about Indigenous people in Canada. It starts with, well, what was life like in the 50s and 60s and the 1940s? And you speak to older people, and they can tell you about how they were little small family groups, how they hunted the caribou, how they went into the mountains at certain times of the year, and how everyone worked very closely with each other, very tight units where everyone knew their role. To explain why people are now drunk in the street, on the streets of Canada, you have to, Indigenous people, you see drunk Indigenous people on the streets. Why did that happen? It's because their culture was eroded and destroyed by the schools. The schools tried to wipe out their culture. That was the declared object of the schools where people lived, where the students were sent, residential schools. So how do you don't get from a very tight-knit Indigenous community to this social problem on the street overnight. Something happened. What happened? The schools happened. So the past is very important in explaining the present and to show the changes.
És aquesta capacitat, no, que té el còmic, a més explicar molta informació del passat, jo crec que emergeix amb una potència brutal en els teus àlbums. Però tenim aquí el Joe Sacco, l'estic monopolitzant, això no està bé, així que m'agradaria obrir el micro per si hi ha preguntes, comentaris. Jo seguiria, tinc aquí un arsenal de preguntes per fer-li per interès propi i egoisme absolut, però crec que és el moment d'obrir micro per si hi ha alguna pregunta i alguna qüestió que voleu parlar amb el Joe. Segur que milers de coses us han sorgit dels àlbums. Aquí hi ha una pregunta.
Gràcies, és un plaer tenir-lo aquí. Ha parlat abans de com hi havia entrevistats que li mentien directament a la cara i era molt obvi. En la meva opinió, avui dia això passa amb molts polítics també. I crec que és un canvi que hi ha hagut en els darrers anys a la política. Abans es mentia igualment, però s'intentava mantenir una imatge de ser una persona responsable i que s'havia de tenir en compte. Ara no hi ha cap problema en que siguis un racista i un homòfob sent un representant d'un país, fins i tot. I aquí crec que ha tingut molt a veure també en com ho rep la gent el paper de les xarxes socials. M'agradaria que pogués parlar una mica d'això, de com ha canviat el paper de les xarxes socials. Crec que en el cas de la Índia també aquestes mobs, aquests riots també en certa manera tenen a veure en com les xarxes socials ens donen una imatge polaritzada de la realitat. I respecte a això també li volia preguntar, tenint un món tan polaritzat, Creu que un discurs tan treballat, el del periodisme de llarg recorregut, que es treballa amb temps, que tracta de buscar els matisos de la veritat, arriba al públic finalment, quan la gent el que vol és només immediatesa i respostes fàcils?
Well, about social media, I think you're right. I mean, social media, it's not all one thing. I think it's through social media platforms that people in the West got a good understanding about what was going on in Gaza. Really, if it wasn't for unfiltered images and reports that people could see, I'm not sure a lot of people's minds would have been changed, but I think in the West, a lot of people's minds have changed about that situation. So in that case, I think there's a value to going around the mainstream media and going around the media that answers to power and to the establishment. But yes, social media can also inflame people. And there's an instance of it in this book where when there was a mass meeting, a politician sent around images of a couple of people being killed by a mob. And when he posted it, he said these were two Hindu boys that were killed. This is a picture of them being killed. And actually, it turns out that post, those images, and that film was from Afghanistan from some years before. It wasn't from India. So people are easily inflamed. And people are easily inflamed because perhaps they want to be inflamed. That again, that's a question of psychology. Now, your other question was about, can this work? Can works like this? Do people want to know these things, or do they want to know the truth? Is that what you're asking? I don't know if I have the answer to that. All I think I do is provide the raw material. Look, the fact that you're all here means you must be interested in what's going on, and you must be looking for some reality in this world, reality as opposed to the narratives that are created for us. And I mean, that's a good sign. But all I feel I can do is put information out there, and by showing my working methods as I'm doing the books, people will have a sense whether it's credible or not. You can only do what you can do, Hopefully people will listen. I think people are quite suspicious now of their leadership. Whether they can do something about it is another story.
Moltes gràcies. Més preguntes? Aquí hi ha una.
Hi. I wanted to ask you, Ivan spoke about photojournalists, and really often in interviews, photojournalists speak about their camera as a screen from their reality and themselves, even if it's not a real shield. At the moment, they think it is. And do you have something similar in your activity, or in the way you stay there in the reality, if you can kind of shield yourself from it while you are there?
I mean, photojournalists are sort of a breed apart. I mean, that's another level of journalism, and it's when you see them at work, they really take risks. I mean, my hat's off to photojournalists for the work that they do, and how if something is coming toward you that's dangerous, they're standing up to take a picture. They want to get that picture. So it's good that they pretend that the camera is some sort of a shield. I don't feel that for myself. I don't think the pencil's going to do it for me. So I'm usually the one running with everyone else that's running.
Més qüestions per aquí. Hi ha dos. Per allà.
Millor que faci la pregunta en català o la faig directament en anglès?
Hi ha interpretació.
Vale, doncs miro en català perquè entengui tothom. Sí. Bueno, jo vaig llegir el seu llibre sobre Gaza. També he llegit alguns llibres sobre el conflicte de Palestina que potser està una mica més cap al costat israelià. Per exemple, Èxodo, de Leon Uri. Últimament he llegit a Edward Said sobre Palestina i sembla que molta gent té una perspectiva de blanc o negre sobre aquest conflicte i sempre he pensat que hi ha molts matisos. El meu pare va viatjar a Israel fa molts anys, sempre ha sigut un tema a la meva família que ho hem parlat i sempre m'ha sorprès com la gent es posiciona o blanc o negre, malos o buenos, no? Així que jo vull saber si creus realment que és així i per què és així. I després, la segona part és més personal. Jo aniré aquest Nadal a aquesta regió, també per conèixer de primera mà el que està passant. No aniré a Gaza, perquè no es pot, si aniré al West Bank, a Cisjordània, i a Israel. Així que vull preguntar-te de quina manera recomanes que pugui anar per entendre el que està passant allà, sense anar d'un costat a un altre, simplement per entendre el que està passant allà, el que està passant amb la gent. I no em diguis que no hi vagi, això ja m'ho diu ma mare. Gràcies.
Well, I'm not your mother, so I encourage you to go. Just go with an open mind and talk to people. The thing is to listen and to watch and see what's going on. You'll go through the checkpoints. You'll speak to Israelis and they'll tell you something, and you'll speak to Palestinians and they'll tell you something, and then it's going to be up to you and how you look at it. Now, as far as like the black and white situation, when I started doing the book about, when I did the book about Palestine, obviously I'm taking it from a Palestinian perspective. The reason is, when I started out doing this sort of work, there was nothing but the Israeli perspective in the United States. I mean, think where I was growing up. All I ever heard was the Israeli perspective. And the proof of that is, in high school and all through college, I thought Palestinians were terrorists. That wasn't from deep study of the Middle East. That was from, doing something and the TV's on and there's a story about Palestinians firing rockets from Lebanon, or there's a bus bombing, or there's a hijacking. All those sorts of things I remember quite well. It's only when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 and there was a large-scale massacre of Palestinians in Beirut, Sabra Shatila, by Christian militias allied with the Israelis, the Israelis blocked the Palestinians from escaping. It's only then that I thought, wait a minute, I thought the Palestinians were terrorists. So what the books I've done they come out of a feeling that I was learning, I had a very incomplete knowledge of what was going on. And I had to interrogate why I thought Palestinians were terrorists. And it's because the only time I ever heard the word Palestinian was next to the word terrorism, or with the word terrorism. So my work is an attempt not to be balanced about it, but to actually say, well, we already know in America anyway, the Israeli side, I want to do something that's from the Palestinian perspective. My nuance isn't between Israeli and Palestine. My nuance, I hope, is showing Palestinians as flawed people like everyone else. They're not angels. They're not victims with a capital V. They're not terrorists with a capital T. They're people who live and work and have families and try to raise them as best they can. And it's trying to show people as people who sometimes say things that you think, oh, this isn't going to sound good to a Western audience, but I'm trying to report honestly on what I'm hearing. But yeah, definitely the Palestinian perspective, but a nuanced approach to the Palestinian perspective. But anyway, I'm glad you're going. Maybe you should carry a camera and put it in front of you and see if that helps.
Teníem una altra pregunta per aquí davant i tenim potser temps per una... Ah, hi ha una altra allà, perfecte. Tenim temps per aquestes dues preguntes.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a couple of questions about the country you're coming from, the United States. And since you mentioned three words tonight, democracy, crowd, and law, I would like to ask you if you think that United States crowd or citizens can save United States from the current situation that we are all witnessing at the moment, and if that's the case, if this scares you, that might lead to kind of civil war in the United States to fight the current situation we have. And the second question is, do you see yourself at some point writing a comic about your own country? What's happening now or what have been happening during the last decade?
Well, to answer the last question first, the book that you mentioned here, that was mentioned, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, was a book about what's going on in America. A friend of mine, a journalist colleague of mine named Chris Hedges, and I went to a number of places where you can sort of see society really breaking down. And so I did some reporting. I have ideas for writing more about the United States. I could write things even from the perspective of the city I live in, which is Portland, Oregon, which is, you see societal collapse on the street because there's a great homeless population. It's not the problem that Trump talks about when he talks about Portland. It's a problem that America doesn't want to address that exists everywhere. It has to do with inequality and that sort of thing. Now, the other question was about the first question. Oh, will the American people make some sort of a change? I think there are a lot of American people who want to make some sort of a change. I think that's clear. And I'm not one who's going to predict that it's going to go one way or the other. I think Trump and the people, especially the people behind Trump, have a very authoritarian idea of where they want America to go. I think that's indisputable. And I'm not afraid of using the word fascist when we talk about what their ideas are. There is a resistance to it, I think. Is it coming from the establishment Democrats? Probably not. In other words, those who are considered part of the party. You get the feeling that people do want something to change. The fact that in New York someone like Mamdani was elected as mayor is a good sign. The question is, can he actually fight the establishment and actually deliver on his promises? And will Trump try to sabotage him, or will the Democratic establishment try to sabotage him, or will both things be true? We have to see. We have to see. I think the people really are not pleased. The problem always when people are unsure of themselves and they see their positions really deteriorating, and a lot of my friends, you see people who don't know how they're going to retire, they're worried about health care, all this sort of stuff. You always worry that sort of frustration can be channeled by a politician like Trump into looking at someone like the people coming from south of the border, the immigrant. Because people should be questioning their system, not immigrants. America was built on immigrants, for example. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens, I guess. I don't know.
Una última pregunta.
L'ultima.
Hello.
Hi.
So I'd like to ask about your recent collaboration with Art Spiegelman. So I'm very curious about how it happened, like the idea and how it became. The why, I think it's quite self-explanatory, but also why.
Yeah, because I did this, I don't know if everyone knows here, but I did a very short 3-page comic with Art Spiegelman about what's going on in Gaza. It happened because we're good friends, and I was sitting in his place in New York, and we were drinking a bottle of wine, and we were just talking about what's going on, and he was very upset with what's going on in Gaza. And I was interested in what he was saying, and later when I was back home, I wrote to him and I said, would you be interested in working on a comic about this? So he said yes, which surprised me, because he really hadn't worked on comics in a long time. So in some ways, I thought it was important to hear what he had to say about the issue. He's an important cultural figure. So what he says carries some weight because of what he created with Mouse, which is one of the most amazing, it's kind of the great comic. I was interested in what he had to say. I thought other people would be. But also, I just wanted Art to start drawing comics again, which he hasn't done in 20 years, and this was a way of pulling him into it. So I went a couple of times to New York, and we sort of sat side by side drawing and hammering out the script and all that. And it was tough. It was tough to do, but we managed. And yeah, it was a good experience for me. There's always a lot to learn from Art.
Si mireu aquest còmic, veureu que la imatge final és molt realment impactant, no? Són els 4 genets de l'apocalipsi, no? Al final del còmic, que d'alguna manera són les amenaces a la política. Jo diria que gairebé és l'al·legoria d'un Steve Bannon, no? Que no deixa de ser el gran guionista, malauradament, d'Estats Units, no? I només cal pensar en aquella cosa que sempre diu l'Steve Bannon, flood the zone with shit, no? Perquè al final és això el que intenten, no? El món de Trump, el que hi ha darrere de Trump, no? I jo crec que les imatges, els còmics d'algú com Joe Sacco, el que aconsegueixen és obrir escletxes en això, escletxes de pensament, de resistència, no? En aquest sentit diria que és un Goya modern, no? És a dir, és algú que fa de testimoni i que fa un gest de resistència que és molt valuós. Bueno, m'ho sembla a mi, permetem que t'ho digui, perquè crec que sí, que la teva feina és molt valuosa i crec que en particular aquest llibre, com ell deia, ell mateix ha dit, té aquest alè molt més reflexiu i filosòfic sobre què és la por, què són les narratives que construïm, no? Crec que és molt universal, es pot aplicar i ens ha d'advertir, ha de ser una advertència d'aquest món en el que vivim, no? I com expliques, jo crec, la gran qüestió, què és la política, no? De vegades ens fan creure que la política és un gest d'autoritat, és la legitimació a través de l'elecció, però tu ens expliques el contrari, la política és una mica l'espai entre rostres, és l'acceptació de la diferència, és la negociació, no? I jo crec que aquest és un valor democràtic que traspua des d'aquest llibre i bueno, vull celebrar la publicació d'aquest llibre, agrair moltíssim al Joe Sacco per estar aquí amb nosaltres parlant de la seva feina, d'aquest llibre i de tota la seva trajectòria en particular i de nou agrair a Biblioteques i evidentment a l'editorial, a Penguin, a Reservoir Books per publicar aquestes meravelles, així que moltíssimes gràcies, Joe, gràcies a tothom per estar aquí.
Gràcies. Thanks a lot, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.